Often, perhaps most days, maybe even several times a day, I find myself inquiring, how do I want to show up in this moment, in this day? And the options turn out to be pretty big. I could be showing up with cloudy vision, not really having a sense of what's going on. I could be resting in fear, get caught up in what-ifing about negative things that could happen. Or I could show up feeling separate and isolated, allowing those energies to take over, which they so often can. They're very powerful. Or I can show up seeing clearly and connecting with kindness. And from a mindfulness perspective, seeing clearly is about being realistic about impermanence in life, impermanence in the world, impermanence from moment to moment in an individual life. And part of what happens when we meditate is that as we see all the thoughts come and go, we see the emotions come and go, we see even the bodily sensations come and go. We have our own direct, immediate experience with impermanence so that we know that it is real and beyond just the big picture stuff of we're all going to end up in the same place. Also see how clearly we are connected with one another, how much of what I do affects what's going on with others, how much things that are going on the other side of the globe end up affecting me and all of us. We're all connected. And for me, when I have this realization about how connected we are, the only plausible option is to interact with others with kindness, with having a sense of compassion and joy about how I interact with other people. I'd like to share with you this morning something that we've worked with before that many of you know is a favorite of mine. These are 4 qualities of the heart. And I learned these a few years ago when I was on a silent retreat at the Forest Refuge in Massachusetts. A couple of the teachers there created this way of thinking about these 4 qualities of the heart. Loving kindness, love that connects, is an antidote to all forms of aversion. It is never attachment, and if it slides into sentimentality, compassion brings the heart back into balance. Compassion, love that responds, is an antidote to cruelty, but it is never pity. And if compassion slides into sorrow, joy brings the heart back into balance. Appreciative joy, love that celebrates, is an antidote to envy. It is never competitive, and if it slides into agitated excitement, equanimity brings the heart back into balance. Equanimity, love that allows, is an antidote to partiality. It is never indifferent. If it slides into disconnection, loving kindness brings the heart back into balance. I hope most of you can see that some of these words are highlighted in a deep red and others in a much lighter red. The words such as aversion that are highlighted in a dark red are the far enemies or the opposite of a quality of the heart. So in the first case, aversion is the opposite of loving kindness. What's highlighted in a lighter red is what's called a near enemy. I like to think of near enemies as being those qualities that masquerade as the quality we're pointing toward, but are actually misleading, take us in another direction altogether. So if we think we're in the throes of loving kindness, and it turns out it's attachment, then it's not really loving kindness. Attachment is about control, expectations, getting caught up in the thick of how we want the relationship to be. Loving kindness is non-judgmental. The opposite of compassion, the far enemy, is cruelty, which is pretty straightforward. But this near enemy, what often masquerades as compassion, is pity. The reason that pity is misleading is because pity is about us, and compassion is really about responding to the other. Even when it's self-compassion, we're still responding to that aspect of ourselves that is hurt, that is in trouble. And it doesn't help for the ego to get involved and bring pity into it. The opposite of appreciative joy is envy. Something happens to somebody else that's really good fortune. Sometimes the inclination is to envy them or to be resentful. To think, why did that happen to you and not to me? I deserved it more than you did. Appreciative joy is what allows us to simply feel the joy in our hearts of somebody else's goodness and good fortune. Now, competitiveness can sneak in here, masquerading as joy. Oh, that's good for that other person, but what happened to me is better. So easy to go there. And the opposite of equanimity is partiality. In this case, partiality means that we tend to get caught up in that which we are a part of. I'm a part of this family. I'm a part of this neighborhood. I attended this school. I'm part of this political party. And whatever we're part of has it can take over what we're feeling, how we're thinking, how we're processing things. And we want to create enough space so that we can acknowledge what we're a part of without having it control us. And of course, one way to feign equanimity is to be indifferent. Oh, it is what it is. Again, that's a quality that's masquerading. And I just want to comment in conclusion on how much I love this framing of these four qualities because of how each rolls into the next one. And then the fourth one, equanimity. If it slides into disconnection, then we go back to loving kindness. How they're all connected. These characteristics, or perhaps you might think of them as attitudes, or even behaviors or emotions, that are the far enemies and the near enemies. They're what cloud our judgment. They're what fog up our windshield as we go driving merrily along, missing what's important. They also can make us afraid. can send us into a place where we don't feel comfortable, where we feel separate and isolated. They really can enhance this illusion of separateness that all of us are so vulnerable to as we try to protect ourselves, as we find ourselves grasping for sense pleasure and for identity. The alternative is these qualities of the heart. One way to think about these qualities of the heart is that they give us courage. I think the word courage is particularly appropriate here, since, as so many of you know, the word courage and heart have the same root word, C-O-U-E-R. And when we think about courage, we realize that it's what gives us the ability to navigate life without being caught up by the far and near enemies. So you might take a moment and think about one of the far enemies: partiality, attachment, pity, envy, and how you can use the heart quality of courage to navigate with that. Or perhaps reflecting on kindness and how you might bring kindness into your life more to offset the inclination to be cruel or to be separate or to be competitive or indifferent. How can connecting with kindness help you stay present and not fall vulnerable to these near enemies? Paying attention to our hearts, just feeling our hearts as we're breathing, understanding, investigating, exploring these qualities of the heart, discovering what stands out for you. These are opportunities not only for how we navigate our own lives, but for what we can take out into the world.
Many of you probably recognize those four qualities of the heart as what are called the Brahma Viharas from the Buddhist tradition. And in that tradition, it is said that those qualities of the heart are within each one of us. And when Philip talked about them, he linked them through love. Love that connects, love that responds, love that appreciates another's joy, love that allows. And this kind of love in the Buddhist tradition is thought to be boundless. Boundless because there are no conditions placed on its expression. It describes an expansive condition of the heart with no distinctions or exclusions. So it's kind of the loftiest way we can even think about art. Can you imagine about love? Can you imagine having unconditional love for all beings, even those you intensely dislike? That would be boundless love. But unlike the Dalai Lama, We are not bodhisattvas, most of us anyway. Maybe there's some out there. And we haven't dedicated our lives to the pursuit of relieving the suffering of all sentient beings. And while we might have moments of this complete state of selflessness, our very human qualities more often interfere with the full expression of unconditional love. Those are the near and far enemies. Our needs, our wants, our idiosyncrasies come into play in our relationships and interactions in the world, and sometimes subtly and sometimes blatantly. So those near and far enemies that Philip mentioned impact the movements of our hearts. And these near and far enemies stem from our egos. The I, the selfing that we do, the I, the me, the mine, what I want, what I need, what I believe is important. Our personal agendas come into play. So, for example, we can sense that the far enemy of loving kindness, which is aversion or hatred, we can sense how that might harden our hearts. And we usually don't even have trouble recognizing that intense response because it's so unpleasant. But those more subtle obstacles to unconditional love, those near enemies are trickier because our ego's concerns get mixed up with love. As Philip mentioned, that attachment masquerades as love, and that's because attachment says, I'll love you if, or I'll love you when. Whereas unconditional love allows, honors, appreciates. Attachment grasps, demands, needs, wants to control or possess. This is David Whyte, the poet David Whyte. Unconditional love, he says, is not fully possible. The invitation is made to us every day, whether we desire it or not, to risk ourselves in the conditional world in which we live, and to accept that there is no possible path we can follow where we will be untouched by the heartbreak, the difficulties, and the joys that move us and move through us under the beautiful and beautifully conditional guise of love. So what he's saying is that we humans are not going to embody these heart qualities perfectly. And while these qualities of the awakened heart may already be within us, that overlay of our ego is always ready to claim first place. And it has a tough time yielding its protective and demanding nature to a fully open heart. And as a small example of this, it becomes perfectly clear to me when I'm dealing with our puppy. She's 5 months old. Do I love her? Yes, of course I do. She's absolutely adorable. But as she did this morning, when she empties the wastebasket in my office for about the 5th or 6th time and then chews up all of the paper on the floor, do I get irritated? Yes, I do. I get irritated. I'm annoyed. She's not doing what I want her to do. So my love for her is definitely not unconditional in that moment. On the other hand, every one of us in living our lives has had the experience of dropping the I, the me, the mine, what I want you to do. We sincerely compliment someone. We express gratitude, or we do nice things for other people just because. We dedicate ourselves at work to an important project, or we volunteer at Feed More. I think of a friend who is with us today, who recently has devoted innumerable hours to sorting painstakingly through hundreds and hundreds of photographs, curating them, printing them, arranging them in 6 fat albums designed individually for each of her grandchildren. That's a selfless act of love. Sharon Salzberg, who's one of the gurus about loving kindness, says that whatever awakens a genuine sense of connectedness and care is a loving kindness practice. And Thich Nhat Hanh once said that only those fully awakened beings are able to act without any ego in the mix. But then he said, if an action arises from an intention that is 90% pure and 10% ego, don't focus on the 10%. Focus on the 90%. And he went on to say, if it comes from 90% ego and 10% pure, focus on the 10%, not the 90%. Focus on the wholesome, he said, regardless of the degree. Get in touch with the goodness. Get in touch with the goodness. I love that. So over this last year, our hearts have been continuously assaulted. It's been almost a year. Have been continuously assaulted by the political climate, the tragedies of racial injustice, the fears of the pandemic, now recently the events at the Capitol. And in one way or another, each of us has had to adjust our hearts to weather these assaults. And perhaps, like the frog in the water, that adjustment has been so gradual over this year that we might not be aware of the cumulative effect. I got good evidence of that for myself after I received my first COVID shot, because I was so surprised by the intense relief I felt after I'd received that shot. I hadn't been aware of how much fear I was holding in my heart about this pandemic. So, maybe it's time for a heart check, for considering whether we are in a place where we can risk a bit more openness or softening, for engaging in some of the heart practices. And fortunately, I think for us, that love has a lot of different colors. Those 4 qualities have a lot of shades. Gratitude, generosity, all of those are practices of the heart. And we don't have to worry about whether our actions are offered at 90% or 10%. We can just focus on whatever goodness is there. And besides, it's been said that practicing the heart qualities assists humanity by creating a supportive energy field that makes it easier for others to feel and respond from their heart. So it's not only good for us, but it's good for everyone. So let's take a moment for a brief reflection. And you might close your eyes if that's comfortable. And take a few breaths. And then once again, bringing your attention to your heart. And breathing into your heart space. And asking yourself, what quality of the heart is present in you right now or speaking to you right now? And how might you take that quality into the world in the next few days? What quality of the heart is present in you right now or speaking to you right now? And how might you take that quality into the world in the next few days?